Okay guys, so today I'll be giving you guys a review for test 2. For test 2, there were a lot of 6th grade standards that we covered. We covered the 6th grade lessons 11, 14, lessons 5 and 6, and then we kind of dabbled into some 7th grade material. So this should be fairly an easy test, but I don't want to assume anything, but I'm going to wish you guys all the best of luck. So let's dive into this review. So the first question is a multiple choice question. And just like what I told you guys, with the multiple choice question, only one answer is correct. Okay, so multiple choice questions, only one answer is correct. So let's go over the question. It says a bakery sells 5 apple muffins for every 2 bran muffins sold. Which table shows this ratio? So, of course, you guys, I always like to annotate my questions before I dive into the math. So, what I need to underline is these components are quantities that make up the ratio. So I'm going to write the ratio to the side so you guys can remember. 5 apple muffins to 2 bran muffins. Okay. So it's asking us, and I'm going to circle the question, which table shows this ratio? Which I'll point to that. So the ratio is from 5 to 2. Now I'm going to look at choice A. When I look at the first row of choice A, it matches my ratio. But I want to look at each choice in order to determine if it's correct or not. So for the first row, it shows the correct ratio, 5 to 2. When I look at the next ratio, it shows that it's 10 to 12. Now, you can look at it different ways of how to determine if it's equivalent or not, but the first thing I recognize is that the side that represents, or the column that represents the bran muffins is increased to 12. Well, if you look at the original ratio, the bran muffins was less than the apple muffins. In order for it to be an equivalent ratio, it still has to be proportional to the original ratio. Okay? So there's another way you could solve and figure out if this is an equivalent ratio or not. You could make one of the quantities equivalent to the ratio shown in the table. So this is what I mean by equivalent. So I want to make apples equivalent to 10. So I'm going to multiply by 2, and whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So whenever I multiply 5 times 2, and I want to point this out, the reason why I'm multiplying 5 times 2 is because 5 times 2 would give me 10 apple muffins. Okay? And then when I multiply 2 by 2, it's going to give me 4 bran muffins. And with this, by me doing this, it shows that whenever I have 10 apple muffins, I should have 4 bran muffins. Now, of course, if you guys want to go through to the next row and see if it's the equivalent ratio or not, you can. But at this point, if one row is not equivalent, that means the whole table is not equivalent, okay? If one row does not show an equivalent ratio, that means the whole table is not a proportional or is not the correct table that models this ratio, okay? So now let's look at choice B. Choice B, it doesn't necessarily start off with this ratio 5 to 2, but it starts off with that ratio 10 to 4. Okay, which we've already checked that in the last choice, which 10 to 4 is the equivalent ratio to 5 to 2. Let's look at the next row, and for the next row, I'm going to use green. Okay, so I see that it's 15 to 6. So this means that whenever there's 15 muffins, apple muffins, there are 6 bran muffins. Okay? Now, in the last choice, I used multiplication to determine if it was an equivalent ratio or not. But with this choice or this row, I'm going to use division to figure out if it's equivalent or not. And what I mean by that is I want to find a common factor, the greatest common factor between 15 and 6. And what I mean by the greatest common factor, I mean the biggest number or the largest number that both 15 and 16 can be divided by. Can you guess that number? If you guess 3, you are absolutely correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. And when I divide by 3 on both sides, I should get 5 apple muffins to 2 bran muffins. Being that the ratio is in its simplest form and it still matches the original ratio, that means that it is equivalent, okay? This row is equivalent, so this row checks off. Now, being that this row checks off, I need to check off the next row to see if it's, or not check off the next row, but check the next row to see if it's equivalent or not. So I apologize for erasing my annotations. If you need it, always feel free to rewind the video. All right, so let's move to the next answer choice, and I'm going to use purple to answer it. So now for the last row, it says 35 apple muffins to 14 bran muffins. So what you can do is, I use division in my last question. You can use multiplication. You know, usually children or students like using multiplication because it's something that's they're more familiar with. So I'm going to use multiplication for this one, and here's what I mean by that. So I want to make one of the quantities equivalent to the quantity showed in the ratio. In my first question, I checked for apples. Let's do bran for this question. So I'm looking at the bran side. How can I get 2 to 14? What can I multiply times 2 to get to 14? If you guess 7, you are absolutely correct. And whatever you do to one side of the ratio, you must do to the other side of the ratio. So 2 times 7 is 14, which that checks off. And 5 times 7 is 35, which means that this row is the equivalent ratio. So if all 3 rows model the equivalent ratio, that means that this is the correct table. Now, being that this is a multiple choice question, I don't necessarily have to check the other answers to see if they could be correct or not, since I checked my work for this one. You can if you want to, but we checked it, we took our time, and all the ratios in this table is equivalent to 5 to 2.